I've been, since January, been going through the names of God, the names of our Father. And this month, we're on ADONAI. And so that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. We've had several that we've gone through over the past month. And the meaning of ADONAI is master, owner, never asking for something which he doesn't equip the one he asks. So go with me in your Bibles to Romans chapter 12 and verse 6. And I'm reading from the New Living Translation. It says, Romans chapter 12, verse 6, in His grace, God has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. Now, we're going to go over the next couple of scriptures of what he's talking about, but what I've been meditating on over the past several weeks, and we have a bunch of examples in the scriptures of men that have done what God has given them to do and done it well. And the one that God keeps bringing up into my mind is Noah. And the reason is because God gave Noah the plans and we know the story of the ark and how to build it and what he wanted to do, and it was a 100-year assignment, or more than a 100-year assignment. And I know that during being a man, I know that there had to been during that over 100 years that he got up in the morning and didn't want to do what God had given him to do. Maybe even had heard people telling him how crazy he was for doing that, and maybe even started believing it at times, or having to put it aside in hearing what God had given him to do, because God had given him the ability to do that. That was in him. The scripture says that he knew you before when you were in your mother's womb, so God put that in him when he was in his mother's womb to be able to do that. Now, it was a choice. It's always a choice of us doing what God has given us to do. There's always the choice in front of us to do. What is it? Deuteronomy says, I set before you life and death, blessings and cursings, therefore choose life. We always have that in front of us to do. When we do what God puts in front of us to do, that's life. And he puts that ability to do that in us before we're even born. And as I've been meditating on this and thinking about this, it's occurred to me that, I've always said God knows me better than I know myself, and he knows what I've always used the term what'll make me happy, and I'm not so sure that God is, yes, he wants me to have joy, but I'm not so sure that he's concerned about me being happy. I think he's more concerned about me doing what he has put in me to do. And when I do that, I learn, as Paul says, to be content. Yeah. And when I learn to be content, whether I realize it or not, I'm actually happy. Yep. But what he's saying here, and we'll go back Romans 12:6, he says, in his grace God has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. So as God has given you the ability to prophesy, speak out with as much faith as God has given you. If your gift is serving others, serve them well. If you're a teacher, teach well. If your gift is to encourage others, be encouraging. If it is giving, give generously. If God has given you leadership ability, take the responsibility seriously. And if you have a gift for showing kindness to others, do it gladly. Now, these are all things that we have the ability to do. And we were just talking about that this morning, is taking one thing at a time and doing that and doing it well. Doing what God has before you for today. See, we worry too much about what's going to happen tomorrow and the next day and therefore the day after that and on, when God is saying, do what's in front of you today. Amen. And do it well. And even moment by moment, because at this moment I may be, God telling me to be generous and it's added to it as the day goes on. But do what is before you to do well, and there's certain things that God has given each of us individually to do, and we can do it well because it's in us. It's already there. So if God has made you a builder, do it and do it well. I was talking to a man the other day. He said, he was telling me that his dad had bought a building, and he called him over there, and roof was caving in, and there was a lot of stuff that needed to be done, and he went over there with some paper and took measurements and went and sat down at his dad's table and drew the plans out, and they brought the plans to the architect, and the architect drew them out like he had drawn it. They sent it off to the fire marshal's office, and the fire marshal approved it and sent it back, and they built the building according to the plans that he drew. But he said, I'm not an architect. That was all God. God put in me the ability to draw the plans for that. That didn't make me an architect. Yeah. Now, God can call you to be an architect, and you can sit down and you can draw the plans out day after day after day for different buildings, and that's great. What I'm getting at is when God gives you something to do, you do. And if you're called to be an architect, do it and do it well. But just because God gives you the plans for a building and you draw it out doesn't make you an architect. God gave Noah the plans for the ark, and it took him over 100 years to build it, and he stayed with that project, but he never asked Noah to build an ark again. Or anybody else. Now, I know that they're building I can't even say the word. They're building arks, replica, is that it? I know that they're building those now, and I'm not saying God didn't tell them to build those, and that's not. And I'm not saying He did. That's between them and God, and that's where we got to get what God has given me to do. Then I do what He says for me to do. There's other men that Abraham. God give Abraham things to do, and he stuck with it. He didn't quit. Now and we know all these men that there's things that happened in their lives, but God didn't give up on them. That was in Abraham to be the father of many nations, and that was in him before God spoke that to him. See, God speaks to us and tells us. It's been said here a bunch of times. He tells us in time so we can be obedient on time. He knows it's for us to believe Him, and He continue to show us He's patient with it. That's why Dad says all the time, don't be. God's not in a hurry. He's not. He's not in a hurry for us to get done. And it doesn't mean that I slow down and stop doing what God puts before me to do. It's just knowing that each day as I do what He's put before me to do, that's okay. It's okay to not understand sometimes, or to not know exactly how it's going to come about. It's okay okay, God, what do you want me to do right now? We know God has called each one of us, and we may know the call on our life, but it's okay to take one step at a time, and not be, when He says run, run. When He says walk, walk. If He says sit down and be still for a minute, sit down and be still for a minute. And it's okay to do those things. I know I have in the years past that you gotta hurry up. We got to hurry up and get it done. And everything that we see, Abraham was 25 years before he had Isaac. Noah, we just talked about, was 100 years. Enoch walked with God for 300 years. Not being in so big of a hurry, because this is the thing I just saw this the other day. When we get in a hurry, the chances are we're going to miss something. And we may miss the key part that we need. David, and it's about doing what God says to do and doing what God says, no, you don't need to do that. David, he wanted to build the temple, and God said no. Right. And so he didn't. But that didn't stop him from storing up, so Solomon had what he needed to build the temple. And so it's doing what God has put in you to do. David it was in him to war, and that's why God said, no, you can't build my temple. But your son can. And so knowing what is in you, what God has put in you to do, and doing it, like I said, well. And not trying to be what you're not. Be who God called you to be, and if He didn't call you to do that, then don't do it. Go with me to Philippians chapter 4. In verse 11. It says, not that I was ever in need, for I have learned how to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything. I have learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it is with a full stomach or empty, with plenty or little. For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. Now, we use that scripture. Well, he said, I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. And that's true. We can. Did God tell me to do everything? When he's talking here, he's saying, I had the strength to be content wherever I was at. I had the strength to be content when my stomach was empty. I had the strength to be content when my stomach was full. He couldn't have an empty stomach and a full stomach at the same time. So he had the strength to be where he was at through Christ. He had the strength when he had plenty, and he had the strength when he had little. And so I can do whatever God put before me to do, because He put in me the ability to do what is before me. Today may be building a house. Tomorrow may be sitting on the front porch rocking. And so I have the strength to do whatever is before me at that time. James, as I'm thinking about this, I think about James. I can build a house. Now, I'll probably call James 1,000 times in the process. But I could, and it'd probably be wrong. There'd be a lot of mistakes, and it would take me twice as long as it takes James, and cost at least twice as much. But I can do that. But the question is, did God tell me to do that? And if I did do that, does that make me a builder? It's being who God called you to be, and being okay with that. Because He has put in you who you are. He has put in me who I am. And knowing who Father is, and knowing what He's like and what He does and why He does it, is so that I can know who I am. And so you can know who you are. Because that's ultimately the goal, is to know who He is, to what we talked about this morning, being face to face, having an intimate relationship with Father God. And so this morning, as we talk about this, I want you to go to Matthew 26. And I want to read this. I want to read this part of the story, and we know it, but I want to go over it anyway. Because Jesus had in Him, at 12 years old, we know that Jesus knew who He was, but yet He went home with Joseph and Mary. He had to understand what Father had put in Him as well. Everything we always say, and do we really believe that Jesus went through the things that He went through, and He had to, so that to be an example that we can go through those things too. We face things all the time that we question. I know I do question whether it's the enemy or God allowing it. When we look at Job and different ones that things have happened to, the circumstances that we face, I question what is going on. Why is that happening? And I want to backtrack for a minute, because I forgot to read Chambers for today. I picked this up this morning, and I think it fits here. Oswald Chambers, my utmost for His highest, for today, can you come down from the mountain? John 12:36, while you have the light, believe in the light. He says we all have moments when we feel better than ever before, and we say, I feel fit for anything. If only I could always be like this. We are not meant to be. We're not meant to feel like that we can do everything, because if I felt like that all the time, then I have no need for Father. Those moments are moments of insight which we have to live up to, even when we do not feel like it. Many of us are no good for the everyday world when we are not on the mountaintop. Yet we must bring our everyday life up to the standard revealed to us on the mountain when we were there. Never allow a feeling that was awakened in you on the mountaintop to evaporate. Don't place yourself on the shelf by thinking how great to be in such a wonderful state of mind. Act immediately. Do something, even if your only reason to act is that you would rather not. I couldn't say it better. If during a prayer meeting God shows you something to do, don't say, I'll do it, just do it. Pick yourself up by the back of the neck and shake off your fleshly laziness. Laziness can always be seen in our cravings for a mountaintop experience. All we talk about is our planning for our time on the mountaintop. We must learn to live in the ordinary gray day according to what we saw on the mountain. Don't give up because you have been blocked and confused once. Go after it again. Burn your bridges behind you and stand committed to God by an act of your own will. Never change your decision, but be sure to make your decision in the light of what you saw and learned on the mountain. When you make a decision, there's no sense turning back. Go with the decision that you make. But like he said, make sure you make the decision according to him. So Matthew 26, verse 26, as they were eating, Jesus took some bread and blessed it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, "Take this and eat it, for this is my body." And he took a cup of wine and gave thanks to God for it. He gave it to them and said, "Each of you drink from it, for this is my blood, for which confirms the covenant between God and his people. It is poured out as a sacrifice to forgive the sins of many." I read through this. I want to skip down to verse 36 for a minute. It says, "Then Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and he said, 'Sit here while I go over there and pray.' He took Peter and Zebedee's two sons, James and John, and he became anguished and distressed. He told them, 'My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me.' He went a little further and bowed with his face to the ground, praying, 'My Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me, yet I want your will to be done, not mine.'" He was after Father's will, and that's what we're after. The will of the Father in our life. And that will sometimes brings stuff that we don't like to do. And sometimes it's stuff that takes longer, that seems to take longer, or takes longer than we think it ought to. And that's what Chambers was saying, don't give up just because it seems to be taking a long time, because chances are the reason it's taking a long time is because God knew before, when he put that in me, that it was going to take that long. And he's not stressed about it, and so I don't need to be stressed about it. Because it's part of growing up. It's part of becoming mature in the thing in God, in Father, and that's so. Be okay with where you're at. Not okay to stay where you're at, but knowing that Father has you where you're at now, and He knows where you're at, and He knows what's in you, and He's bringing about everything to bring that purpose to full maturity in your life. And I'm standing up here today, and you say, "Well, you got it all together." No, my knees are knocking, because God set before me something to do that me myself I don't want to do, and I could take the easy way out, but I know that's not what Father has for me to do. And the same is with all of us.